There are 7 parts to the electromagnetic spectrum, but in this video we're only concerning ourselves with one. That's visible light, or the light we can see. So this ranges all the way from red down to violet, via orange, yellow, green, blue and indigo. So the red end of the spectrum, the violet end of the spectrum, the violet end has the highest frequency but the lowest wavelength. Red end of the spectrum has the opposite. It has the lowest frequency, and that means it has the highest wavelength. One of the things light can do is reflect. So we're going to look at 2 different types of reflection. The first one is something off a flat surface, a very polished surface like a mirror. This would be called specular reflection, and that means the rays of light hitting the mirror parallel to each other also leave the mirror or surface parallel to each other, and enables images to be formed. The other type of reflection is from a more rough surface. This is called diffuse reflection. So as you can see, the rays of light enter the mirror parallel to each other, but they exit at different angles because the surface is rough. It does not reflect them evenly, so they end up being scattered. So this would be any rough surface that's not a polished mirror, so clothes, carpet, walls, anything like that. So for this part of the video, we're just looking at diffuse reflection. We're not necessarily looking at mirrors, we're looking at surfaces and what colours they might absorb or reflect. So if I have white light, which if we don't know, it contains all colours, if that hits the surface, and if only the red part of the spectrum is reflected, with orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet being absorbed, that shows us that the colour is red. So the colour of the object is red. And if I was looking at that object, you would see it as red because it's only reflecting red light. In another example, we've got white light incident on this surface down here. Let's say we've got red being reflected and all the blue parts of the spectrum being reflected, so blue, indigo and violet, but orange, yellow and green absorbed. So what that would mean is that would combine the reds and the blue colours together, so the object would be purple, as it's reflecting both red and blue light, so they combine together, in this case, to make purple. If we have no light being reflected, so in this example here, all the white or any colour is absorbed, that shows us the object is black or appears black, because there's no light reflected and all colour is absorbed. If I shine blue light onto a red surface, and we know it's a red surface already, if there's a red surface with blue light incident on it, it's not going to reflect any light. Red surfaces only reflect red light, so if there's no red light incident on it, it cannot reflect it. So therefore no light's going to come off it. If you were viewing it from afar, you would say it appears black because it's not reflecting any light. Next, let's talk about filters. So filters don't allow light to be reflected, they allow light to be transmitted. So let's have white light going through a red filter. Now a red filter will transmit red colours, but it will absorb all other colour wavelengths. So that means in this case that the red light goes through, but all the other colours are absorbed. If we were then to put this red light through a blue filters do the same thing, but they only transmit blue, and they'll absorb all the other colours. So because it's not white light hitting this filter, it's only red. That means that it's going to absorb the red, but there's no blue light for it to transmit. So therefore it's not transmitting any colours at all. It's absorbing all the light that's incident on it because it's just red. If you were to view from the other side of this filter, the object, let's say coming from the white light from initially, again it would appear black. Next, we're going to consider a couple of key definitions, which are in general, if I've got all light being transmitted through a surface, we call it transparent. If there's only some light being transmitted, we call it translucent. And something that's called opaque means that no light is being transmitted at all through it. Next, we're going to look at lenses. So there are 2 types of lenses you need to know. There are convex lenses and there are concave lenses. Now the way to remember it is concave is sort of bends inwards at the middle, looks a bit like a cave, whereas convex is the other one. You also need to be familiar with the symbols for each, which I've drawn here. So convex has another name. Convex, the other name for it is a converging lens. As you can see the rays of light here, they enter the lens parallel to each other, but they converge to a point or a focal point. Concave lenses are known as, on the other hand, diverging lenses. That's because the rays of light that enter parallel to each other will diverge or get further apart from each other. And the symbol I've drawn here as well. So we need to be able to draw lens ray diagrams to be able to figure out what images will look like once they go through some of these lenses. So let's set up our ray diagram. We've got a horizontal line, which is called the principal axis, and we're going to set up our lens. I'm going to use the symbol for the convex lens in the middle. I'm going to draw a focal point, capital F, on either side of the lens. They should be equidistant from each other. This will normally be done I'm going to set up a focal point on each side of the lens. This will normally be done in an exam question for you. And the distance between the focal length and the lens is focal point and the lens is known as the focal length. So I'm going to represent my object as an arrow. It could be anything, it could be a tree, it could be a person, but arrow is simplest to draw. So the first ray of light we draw, both of them are going to come from the top of the object. The first ray of light is going to go horizontally from the top of the object through the lens, then it's going to refract and it's going to go through the focal point on the other side. Don't forget, lenses are made from transparent materials so that it refracts, light can bend. The other ray of light we're going to draw is going to go through the center of the lens, and this one isn't going to change. This is because if it's going through the center of the lens, it is entering the lens roughly normal to the lens, i.e. perpendicular, so it won't refract as it goes through it. And we draw it going out the other side in a nice long continual line. So the image gets formed where the rays of light cross over. So in this case, as we can see, if I'm drawing the image in here, it's actually upside down. The top of the image has to still be where the rays of light cross over, because that's where they've come from. So we describe this image in three ways. The first way is to say it's inverted, meaning it's upside down. It's also a little bit magnified, not too much in this diagram, but it's got a little bit bigger, and it's a real image. Real image means the rays of light cross over after a lens or a mirror, and they can be projected onto a screen. If I was to put a screen there, then this would be what's formed. An example of this would be like a cinema screen when you're projecting something from a projector. The next example we're going to look at is a convex lens, but the object is much closer. So as I'm setting my diagram, the object is further in, closer to the lens than the focal point on the left-hand side. So let's draw my rays of light in. My first ray is going to go parallel to the axis, horizontally, through the lens and then through the focal point. My next ray goes through the center of the lens, just like before. But we notice something weird happens. The rays of light are not going to cross over on the right-hand side of the lens. So therefore we can't have a real image being formed. If I was to observe the image from the right hand side, so after the lens, we don't get a real image. So therefore we have to trace the rays of light back so we can find a virtual image. So if I trace these two rays of light back, they go quite far back and the image ends up being quite large because the rays of light have been traced back so far that the image has got a lot bigger. So we describe this image as upright because it's not upside down, it's magnified, it's a lot bigger, and it's virtual, meaning the rays haven't crossed over so it can't be projected onto a screen. An example of this would be in a magnifying class because it makes a virtual image of an object much, much bigger than it actually is. And to calculate magnification, we need to know the object height and the image height, just like you would need to know in biology. The last lens we're going to look at is our concave lens. Now there's only one type of diagram for this. So if I set up my diagram with my symbol for the concave lens just like I did for my convex lens, it doesn't matter where the object is for this, all the diagrams look the same. So I'm going to have my ray of light going first of all from the top of the object horizontally to the lens, but this time it's not a converging lens, so the ray of light doesn't go down through the focal point, it's actually going to converge away from the other rays of light. But I've got to be careful how I do this. I draw it going away from the rays of light, but it's got to be in line with the focal point on the left-hand side of the lens. So I'd say it's horizontal to the lens, but you sort of trace it back through F. I would do a dotted line to indicate it's not a real line. It's not a real ray of light. The second rule is unchanged. That still goes one ray of light through the center of the lens, through the center of everything. Now hopefully we should note that the two rays of light don't cross over on the right hand side of the image. There's no real image formed, but they do cross over with one of the virtual rays or the rays I've traced back. Now this image is therefore upright, it's diminished, meaning it's quite significantly smaller, and it's a virtual image for the same reason as previously. The real rays of light have not crossed over. So an example of this would be a telescope, which takes really big objects and makes them really small in telescopes for us to be able to see. And that's our concave lens. Each of those diagrams would be 3 marks for the drawing of the rays if you draw them in the real exam. Lastly, for this separate science only video, we're going to talk about blackbody radiation. Now this is something that's unique to the AQA specification from what I'm aware, but even though it sounds a bit scary, a bit weird, trust me, it's not too bad. So let's say we've got a cup or a mug of water, for example, and I've got a heater. So if I was to provide it with some heat or some infrared radiation in, and it's going to re-emit some of that back into the surroundings. Now, if there is more infrared radiation in than there is coming out, that means the temperature of the mug or of the liquid will increase. If I was to reverse it and there's more infrared or heat coming out than going in, the temperature would decrease. and if they are equal to each other, the temperature will stay constant. Now, this can be applied to things like planet Earth. So for the Earth's temperature to increase, and this is how basically the basics of how global warming works, there must be more radiation being absorbed than there is emitted. And instead of saying radiation or waves come in and go out, we should be using those key terms. They're really important. So for example, for my cup of water or tea earlier, we'll say radiation absorbed and radiation emitted instead of in and out. Now, we need to know what this thing called a blackbody is before we can understand blackbody radiation. So a perfect blackbody is defined by something that absorbs 100% of the electromagnetic radiation incident on it, or that is going into it. It also emits or re-emits 100% of that electromagnetic radiation, hence why it's known as a perfect blackbody. Now, it's worth noting that blackbodies don't really exist in nature. They're just a sort of hypothetical that help us make assumptions to calculate different things. They're not a real thing, but there's something in physics that is very important when we look at things like heat. The last thing for this topic is to look at how the intensity of the EM radiation emitted varies depending on the temperature. So generally speaking, over all the different wavelengths, you're going to have a higher intensity for hotter materials versus those for colder. They're all going to emit radiation, but at different intensities and different wavelengths. So we say that different temperatures will emit electromagnetic radiation at different wavelengths and different intensities. For example, the peak of this hotter emitter might be in the UV range, whereas in the colder might be in the visible light range, just like you'd find for different temperatures of Bunsen burner, the different wavelengths are emitted. The hotter one emits blue light, the colder one emits more sort of orangey red light. And that's blackbody radiation. I hope you found that helpful, and please leave it a like if you did so, and keep an eye out for more content coming soon.